We start with breaking news this morning. Even more audio recordings of House Leader Kevin McCarthy coming to light in just the last half hour. CNN playing even more audio from the authors of the book, This Will Not Pass. In it, you can hear McCarthy's thoughts to his caucus in the immediate days after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Here's part of it.
But let me be very clear to all of you, and I've been very clear to the president. He bears responsibilities for his words and actions. No ifs, ands, or buts. I asked him personally today, does he hold responsibility for what happened? Does he feel bad about what happened? He told me he does have some responsibility for what happened. And he needs to acknowledge that.
And in a separate recording, Leader McCarthy has even more strong words for former President Trump.
I know this is not fun. I know this is not great. I know this is very tough. But what I want to do, especially through here, is I don't want to rush things. I want everybody to have all the information needed. I've had it with this guy. What he did is unacceptable. Nobody can defend that, and nobody should defend it.
Let's bring in NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen, and David Drucker, senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, also author of the book In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. Sahil, in that audio, we hear McCarthy say Trump admitted to bearing responsibility for the attack, some responsibility. Is this the first time we've heard this?
Well, it's certainly the first time we've heard a senior Republican official say that Trump has acknowledged his role, that he has some responsibility in the January 6th attack. What Trump actually said, less than clear. We don't have the tape of that. But McCarthy saying, McCarthy's someone who did speak to Trump, who was closely allied with Trump at that time. Saying this on tape is very significant, Jose. And there are a number of big questions to watch here between this and the startling audio that was played last night on Rachel Maddow's show. It's not very often that politicians get caught red-handed saying on tape something that they categorically, emphatically just denied saying. The biggest question here is, how does Donald Trump himself react? Everything Kevin McCarthy has done in the last year and a half, his number one, number two, and number three priority has been to become Speaker of the House. Everything else has been noise. And his close alliance with Trump, despite some of the things he said initially after the January 6th attack, has all been in service of that goal to become Speaker. He believes he needs the former president's support to do that. The second question is, how do his colleagues in the House react? Did most of them, offer him an amnesty on this? Because many of them had the same journey that he did. Angry, upset, disappointed, annoyed with President Trump right after the January 6th attack, and then the politics settled out. Turned out Republican voters stuck with Donald Trump, and they decided to go along with it as well. Are they going to be angry at McCarthy, or are they going to forgive him? There's also one thing in the audio yesterday, Jose, that really stood out to me. McCarthy made an offhand comment, it seems, about a question regarding Vice President Mike Pence potentially pardoning Trump. That suggests a theory of criminal exposure, simply beyond impeachment and conviction, which McCarthy said in that audio seemed likely to happen. A startling series of audio tapes here that could have major implications going forward, Jose.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, just even the quality of the recordings. I mean, it's so clear. David, you've done deep reporting on the relationship between the former president and Leader McCarthy. Let's talk about his relationship with his caucus. Jonathan?
So the relationship between McCarthy and the caucus is one that has been generally good, but somewhat strained. The Freedom Caucus in particular, the hardcore right folks, some of the folks you know by name, Matt Gaetz and others, have been trying to agitate to get rid of Kevin McCarthy. This is going to add fuel to that fire. We've already seen Gaetz commenting on a little bit. One of the things that is a problem here for Kevin McCarthy is that there's no win here. He is going to anger everybody. On the one side, he said it was unacceptable. We've heard the tapes now. On the other side, he's down at Mar-a-Lago dancing with Donald Trump. And now he is characterizing what Donald Trump said to him, saying that Trump said he bore responsibility. It is almost unimaginable to think that Donald Trump's not going to respond to that and deny it at some point. What we have here, if you take a sort of a scope back for a minute is, I know it's a man bites dog story, but Republicans in absolute disarray right now. And basically the leader of the party in the House and the former president of the United States who wants to make a comeback, a complete conflict over the responsibility of that president for the riot that we saw on January 6th. Kevin McCarthy's going to have a lot of explaining to do, not only to Donald Trump, but to his own conference about what exactly happened, why he has done these pivots, and then why he denied what is so clearly on tape, as Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns, the authors of that new book, This Will Not Pass, were able to present to Rachel Maddow last night on MSNBC.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, David, I want to play more of that audio, the one that was released yesterday. Here it is.
Again, I mean, the only discussion I would have with him is that I think this will pass, and it would be my recommendation we should resign. I mean, that would be my take, but I don't think he would take it, but I don't know.
Now, so far, David, Congressmember Liz Cheney and Steve Scalise have denied leaking this audio. How is this going to play out in the caucus, you think?
Right, and I think that's the most interesting question here. Trump and McCarthy have a sort of a topsy-turvy relationship, but always in one direction, with Mr. McCarthy trying to satisfy Mr. Trump. And when I interviewed the former president last year about this, he was very aware of the power he has over elected Republicans, including Mr. McCarthy, because so many of their own voters care about the relationship that Trump has with elected Republicans in Congress. And it's so important to keep Mr. Trump satisfied because of that. And so I don't think the issue here is necessarily, will this impact Trump and Trump's relationship with McCarthy or vice versa? Will Trump look for another candidate for Speaker of the House if Republicans win the majority in November because of this? Because I think he likes the way his relationship with Mr. McCarthy works, where Mr. McCarthy is always trying to satisfy and keep Trump assuaged from doing things that would be counterproductive to Republicans' political aims. I do think the question here, and we've all gotten to it here in this discussion, is how do other House Republicans react to this? When you are a leader of the conference, whether you're the top leader or a major deputy leader, you don't get to say anything in your function as a congressman from wherever or a senator representing the state of whatever. You are always speaking for the conference. And guess what happens when a leader says something that might be problematic? It's problematic because your voters back home start to say, what the heck's going on with your leadership? And do you agree with your leadership? And so of everything that McCarthy has said in these amazing revelations from Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns, and This Will Not Pass, the one that could cause McCarthy some trouble is saying that Trump admitted to some responsibility. I expect a statement any minute where Trump says, I never said any such thing. But the bigger issue for McCarthy to get through, if he's going to get through it, is does he keep his members on board with his candidacy for Speaker? Can he keep any discomfort that they get back home in response to questions about this at a minimum? And if he can do that, then this is really interesting and important news, but it won't impact his trajectory much. If this becomes a problem where voters back home are asking their members, what the heck's going on with your leadership, then McCarthy has a problem.
And then also, David, I mean, the fact that, in his caucus, when he's talking, someone is recording it. And recording a series of conversations and then passing that recording on. I mean, that in and of itself shows not a lot of loyalty or even support, right?
Well, what it shows is that you're breaking the ironclad rule of politics that you are not supposed to break. And right, we think we've broken them all, but you're supposed to be able to trust your colleagues. And I think that you can forgive the leader in this regard. He was speaking in the heat of the moment, probably imagining that this was finally an issue that Trump could not get past. They had just been through an insurrection where they were forced to flee for their lives from the Capitol. But I would just say that a lot of the initial assumptions here has been that somebody like Liz Cheney, she's unequivocally denied it, somebody who is upset with McCarthy's equivocation must have leaked this. But I really wouldn't be surprised that it's somebody who doesn't want him to be Speaker from the Trump wing of the party or from that angle, because this is the sort of thing, particularly after Mr. McCarthy's denial yesterday, then his denial proven not truthful by the tapes. This is the sort of thing that can really cause you a problem. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's people that really don't want him to become Speaker from the part of the conference that is more aligned with former President Trump that had something to do with this. The conference is more than 200 strong. I mean, you just can't assume somebody isn't going to pigeonhole this stuff and put it away for a rainy day when they think it's going to be useful.
David Drucker, Sahil Kapoor, and Jonathan Allen, thank you so much for being with us.